Hi, welcome to the Random Hour. I'm Kyle, and as usual, I'm joined with Devin of More Sports. And today we are joined with a special guest, a girl named Thom.
Thom. People always call it Thom. You're good.
Okay.
That's not just you, that's everybody.
Is it like Thom, T-O-M?
It's Thom, T-O-M. It's the Irish spelling of Tom.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense. I'm like, it's Tom, but there's an H in it. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's the Irish. So coming from Boston, like that's a normal way of spelling Tom. Like T-O-M was always the weird way. And this is like a new phenomenon. So I moved down here. I've always gone by Tom, and people has always just been like, oh, what's your name? Right? Like, I'm like, oh, it's Tom. And that's why. But then like recently, in the past, like since 2020, people have been going Thom, and I'm like, I'd never had this issue before. There's a reason I don't use my full name anymore, and it's because people can't say it.
See, the funny thing is, I only know one person named Thom, T-O-M, but I know two guys named Tommy, short for Thomas. But I never encountered that until I was an adult.
Yeah. No, the same thing, like Thomas, Thom, Tommy. I don't go by Tommy. I will never go by Tommy. Every Tommy I've met, they're sometimes either great men or they're psychotic.
They're interesting.
Like one of two. Like either I love them and I'm like, you're great, or you're insane. So but it's just a girl named Thom. And that's not a you. that's everyone. I realized I probably should have just made it T-O-M, but there's a band now that has that as their insignia. And they're called A Girl Named Thom. And it's fun because I've been going by that since 2013. That was my handle. And they started up in like 2016. So now I'm like, and no one in the band's even named Thom. Let me make this very clear. No one in the band is named Thom.
Yep.
So, it's okay. I have more followers than them.
I think you have a better claim to the name.
I think I do too. I'm like, it's my actual name. Let's go to. I have to trademark it, but I haven't yet. So I guess, or copyright it. I haven't dealt with that yet. I haven't dealt with any of the legal stuff.
Yep.
I'm still kind of new, even though it's been like 4 years. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Ready for the first? Okay.
Yeah, I'll ask the first question since I'm blue. So just at home, if you can just tell people at home, can you just, in simple words, can you just explain, Wiccan practice to the people at home?
So Wicca is a specific religion. But so Wicca is, how do I describe it? Wicca, there's three practices. There's witchcraft, which is a craft. There's paganism, which is like a belief system. And then there's Wicca. And Wicca is also a belief system and also has some of the craft in it. I'm pagan, but I learned a lot about Wicca because that's what was available back then. So it's mainly basically the idea is you have two gods, the Lord and Lady, right, with that one. And they believe that those two gods, the male and the feminine, the female and the masculine, whatever you want to call it, yin yang, right, are the two wholes that come together to create one. And Wicca really kind of founded, roughly, there's a few others also in there, but Wicca is really the one that kind of launched paganism as a whole into the consciousness of society. And that was really, Wicca was it came out of the spiritual movement, roughly, right? Which I think it's like 1920s, 30s. Oh God, remember when Gardner is exactly doing it, 19 something. He's there with Aleister Crowley. So it's like him and Aleister Crowley are debating each other constantly. And they kind of create this religion, and that's his religion that he starts. And then it starts spreading. And then in the 60s, it gets a huge movement push with both the hippies and the first wave or second wave feminists, if you will. Third wave feminists, second wave feminists. And then in the 90s, Wicca then again, because the witch always becomes popular whenever there's a time of strife going on. Really, the 90s is the only time that's like kind of sane. Like that's the anomaly, if you will, of the entire era of like when witchcraft becomes popular again. But it a little bit makes sense because you have the .com bubble happening, you have Y2K coming up, you have all this uncertainty still happening, and people like to look at religion whenever that happens. And from that, you get like another boom with like Laurie Cabot showing up and starting to push, and she does. You know, from the 60s, really like 90s, 80s, 60s, she does a lot of work. She does a lot of work to basically make this, they all do, right? There's the Frosts who do it, who they're not good. Like, they're fine. All the people are fine, but like some of their practices and teachings are a little not great towards women. Let's just say that. Right? Yep. And then Gardner also has some not great stuff for kids. And Laurie's really the first one to be like a female who had to flee and was like, actually, we're going to make this not fucking insane. We're going to make it semi-sane. And that's when you really start getting that push, right? That's when you get Sabrina the Teenage Witch. That's all because of her. And that's all because of Wicca, right? And there's a few that are also dealing with like Bloody Mary, who's like the queen of voodoo at that point too, who's also kind of rising to fame, but her fame's going to come up a little later. She really kind of starts in like the 2000s that kind of starts. So like Vampire Diaries kind of era, if you will, like that's when that starts kind of blowing up. I just froze. I don't know if you saw that I froze on this side. Okay.
Froze and then came back.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure. And then from there, like that happened. At the same time that Wicca's starting, you also have Druidism that's been around, right? And that's back in the 30s, because Churchill was a Druid. It's basically a boys' club, right? It's not really a philosophy. It's kind of on the spiritualism point, but it starts kind of regaining its religious and like practices of the old way. From like basically Churchill up, and that starts. And also at that point, you also have the Welsh who are rediscovering their religion. And some of them are going to Wicca, some of them are going to Druidism, some of them are just calling themselves pagan. And you also have out of that the Norse, who also basically any religion that was seen as the devil worshipping, right? That wasn't an Abrahamic religion, besides Buddhism and Hinduism. And that's because they were just seen as different enough to call them like foreign, which is not. Let's be very clear, like Hinduism is one of the main, like biggest religions in the entire world. Same thing with like Buddhism, like Dalai Lama is doing a lot of work. And you get this like whole kind of spiritual practice starting and happening, and you get paganism born out of that. And then you also get, because it's all of a sudden Wicca does a lot of work to make it acceptable to be a witch, that a lot of the people who were in the closet, let's say the broom closet, if you will, who were witches, but like not wanting to say they're witches, start coming out. And like learn. And basically, if you don't know what witchcraft is, it's a craft, right? It's just like folding laundry, or learning how to tan leather, or learning blacksmithing, right? It's a understanding that certain aspects, either both forgotten ways, meaning like medicinal kind of healing, or medicinal plants, or plants that have certain kind of energies to them that represent something. Understanding that those aspects along with your own kind of belief. I hate the word of manifesting, right? Manifestation, because the manifestation girlies have kind of co-opted that and kind of not made it the best that it is nowadays, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like they think they can just do nothing and manifest it, and that's sometimes correct, and that's some witchcraft, yes, but that's not exactly all of it, right? And everyone has different practices, right? So it's not, you're never going to find a centralized way to do witchcraft. So it's a lot of looking at the folk lore. It's a lot of reading and understanding what the plants are, understanding what aspects the plants are, understanding how to use it, and also how to use your own energy to get what you want, right? Manifest your will if you want. I always say a spell is basically a prayer, just understanding that your God doesn't always have time for you, or the universe doesn't always have time for you to like get what you need. So you have to take it into your own hands. Ultimately, that's what witchcraft is at the end of the day, right? It's just understanding that in order to get one thing, you need to get to the other point. And same thing with like paganism. There's a bunch of gods, you know, we're all familiar with Yahweh and like the Abrahamic religions. And maybe even to a little lesser degree, like Buddha and like Hinduism, right? But like, there's a lot that were there. Most popular Greek pantheon. That's where most people start, right? Or the Egyptian pantheon, right? You choose because like, that's what was around, because people liked teaching about the Hellenistic era because it's ancient Greek and Rome, and America is basically born out of the Roman philosophy of like democracy. And because of that, that is pretty big. And because the Roman deities are basically just the Greek deities, basically they're a little different. Basically that's where most people start. And then you also get some Norse because people are connecting back to their roots of wherever they're from. And then they'll start finding those deities. So like I know a lot of Celtics who are, or Irish people in America, right? They have Irish. Or like Celtic or English, who start relating back to the original belief systems that they have. And a lot of those systems, okay, basically all of the Celtic religion is lost, right? Like the Celts, we understand roughly who their gods are. We understand that the Horned King, right, or the Horned God, whatever you want to call him, the Oak King, right, whoever you want to say they are, we understand that, and we understand that they have a language, and we roughly can get a semi-basic understanding. And Wicca did a lot of the work too with like digging up and figuring out their like wheel of time, which is basically separating the world into like 8 quarters. You have the winter solstice, which is like the high holiday, longest night. You have the summer solstice, longest day, right? And then you have the 2 equinoxes, which are like halfway between that. And then you have the feast holidays, because the Celts were very much on having a party at least every quarter, right? Which is like, you know, and it's also lining up with what's happening in the world too. So like the Celts, or I'm calling them Celts, Gaelic, whatever you want to call that section, because it's also Welsh. It's also like that area is very separated in their religions. You have a lot of Saxons in there too, who are basically Norsemen at that point. Running around and basically understanding that you have the winter solstice, which is a feast. You have the summer, well, those are feast holidays too, but you also have Lammas, which is like Lammas, who is the corn king, and that's like basically the first day that you're planting your seeds, or the first harvest, if you will, like, you know, the start of like fall, basically. Not truly that's going to be the equinox, but that's one harvest. You have Samhain, also known as Halloween today, which is, everyone roughly knows Samhain, probably the most famous of all of them, which is like a huge feast, and like, yeah, ghosts show up, and yeah, the veil is thinner, but that's because the Great Hunt is starting, and it's also the New Year, right? Like that's the Celtic New Year is Samhain. Then you have the winter solstice, which is basically like being like, okay, we're entering the hard times. we're entering the dark time, and we're going to have a holiday just to feast and eat and gorge as much as we possibly can and like celebrate that we're alive in the darkness. Then you have Ibonic. This one is the one I can never say. I always say it and I never say it. It's basically the first day the lamb is born, right?
Yep.
And that's also a big feast because like you made it through the winter. We're in spring now. Okay, cool. And it's also like the start of the planting, right? That's when you're going to start planting that kind of stuff. And then you end up with like the equinox again. And then past that you have Beltane. And Beltane is like the first harvest. It's also when the last of the livestock is born. It's also basically, if you were to imagine a hornier Easter, that's what it is. It's Easter, but instead let's make it all about like we're entering summer. Yeah, the horn god. And also like it's all about mating because all the animals are either mating or they have mated and they're giving birth, right? One of the two. And we're entering summer, so we're entering the good time and celebrating that like you're alive. And then we're back to the summer solstice, which is again like longest day. And I always look at like the winter and summer solstice, right? Because like half. They're also more like the religious holidays, if you will, right? Where like Christmas is like holy. It's like Easter. It's like if you took Easter, but then mixed it with Christmas, because ultimately that's why Christmas is there, because Christmas should be in April too, roughly, if you look at like what the Bible says. But the reason it's now at that point is because the Christians understood that in order to make people want to join their religion back in the back, like way back when Rome was still in charge, they had to move the holiday to make it line up with another holiday that basically aligns up almost exactly, you know.
So like
right, the sun is born, roughly. Like the winter solstice, you can always think of as the sun is reborn, right? And that's all. And that's also like a common trope throughout all of them. Doesn't matter really. Like Egypt, Horus is born roughly in December, right? During like the summer or winter solstice. Because like it's the shortest day. So it makes sense why that would be considered like the restart. And it's all very spiral. So that's at least the religious aspect, if you will. And there's a lot of different beliefs in that too. So like I'm just talking about Celt, and that's just because I know Celt, but like I also know Norse, and that one doesn't connect to me as much. And I always feel like it's not exactly my place to talk about it because like I know a lot, but like it's also not my specialty. I mainly specialize in that Celtic, Irish, a little Egyptian, a decent amount of Babylonian, because I find Babylon fascinating, which is so funny because that was actually my least favorite like section to learn about in history class. And as I've gotten older, like that is my favorite section to learn about, because like Yahweh is originally conceived in that pantheon, right? Like that's where he comes from. And then like he gets adopted by like a sect, which turns into Judaism. And then they make him their main like pantheon. And the other gods all die out from that pantheon. And then you end up with where we are today, eventually, after about 2,000 years. 3,000 or 4,000? 4,000 from Babylon, 2,000 from Jesus. Now, 2,020 years to be exact from Jesus. Give it take a decade.
With a decade or two.
With a decade or two, really like 6 decades, but you know, and it's, you know, I feel like I learned a lot more about that roughly in that kind of section. I know a little bit about like obviously the Abrahamic religions because like we're in America and I'm particularly in the South, so like he's kind of upfront, and also, you know, when you're a pagan or a witch, you have to be able to defend yourself.
Yep.
That's something you learn really quickly. You have to be able to defend your belief. And the best way to defend your beliefs, especially as like a witch, because like the Bible strictly says like thou shalt not let a witch like suffer to live. And that, okay, when that actually shows up in the Bible is also like debated. Is that just a, King James translation? Is it a Greek translation? Because I can't read Greek. And some people say it is, some people say it's not. So it just depends.
I've heard some of it be Hebrew.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know per se. I went to a private Christian school, and I used to study a lot of the older texts.
Yeah.
As well as a lot of the older texts in growing up in a Southern Baptist family. And so I'm not exactly sure. There's also a chance that my memory is blending it together some.
Oh, that happens a lot, I find, especially with that. Because like I've read the Bible, I've read the Quran, and I've read pieces of the Torah. It translates Torah, if you will, because like I can't speak Hebrew and I can't read Hebrew. But like I've read a translated version of the Quran. Like that's the only one that's actually allowed in my house to be, because I'm very much like, I can hear like the church constantly. And I just am like, okay, I'm bombarded by him every 15 minutes. He doesn't need to be in my house. I respect him. I think he's a great guy, but like, don't need him to be in the house. Where like the Quran was a gift by somebody. And I'm like, well, the beginning text is still the same text. It just delineates later on in the, era. But you still always have the basic like Torah, old text, old Bible, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so it just depends. So yeah, but that's kind of a very rough overview of what like paganism is, and then low into Christianity, and also a little belief about what like witchcraft is too.
So what is it to you?
To me? Okay, so to me it's not just like a way of life. Right? Like I am pagan, like I have 3 gods. I've been pagan since I was 3 years old. So like that's always been a thing. And also I declared I was a witch when I was 3 years old. So like to me it's just the way of my life, the way I walk through this world. I understand, that the best way to look at the future isn't just like through tarot, right? Like let's make this very clear. Like I'll read my tarot when I need to. And again, like it's letting fate basically say, hey, this is what's going on, right? But it's almost like a way of life. It is a way of life, but I hate saying that because it sounds so tropey.
It's sort of
it's
like
philosophy.
Your way of life?
It's my way of life, right? It's my way of life. It's also a way of, a lot of people will discover witchcraft for a hot moment. And they'll go to it, they'll find it interesting, and then they'll either walk back or they'll keep walking down the path. And then that's just something you recognize. It's someone will use witchcraft even in the slightest of ways, right? We all sung the songs of like Rain, Rain, Go Away back in the day. That's literally a spell. Like that truly is a spell, as the most basic way you can. And we use it without even knowing, right? Using your old wives' tales. Well, your old wives' tales are just wise woman tales, which are ultimately just witch tales, right? They're witch lore that has carried through the ages, and their knowledge that was forgotten by most people, except in a segment of a population that still exists there. So like we all use witchcraft, even the most devout, fundamentalist, if you will, probably at some point in their life used witchcraft and they just didn't call it witchcraft. I would even give you that prayers are kind of witchcraft, because you're basically putting your wish out into the world and hoping to get it back. You are asking for something. right? The only difference between a prayer doing it is that you're just asking your God to give it to you, where doing a witchcraft is understanding that your God doesn't always have time for you, or the universe doesn't always have time for you. And then putting the elements together to make your wish even stronger, or make your desired outcome even stronger, right? And understanding what plants are going to do that. And there are, you know, you look at rosemary. Well, rosemary is a very protective plant, right? It's used for health, right? Eating a piece of rosemary every single day is basically like taking a multivitamin back in the day, right? And it also was thought that if you carried it, it's going to keep you away from like demons or protection. Like it's going to give you protection, because the idea is, you know, you are healthier because you're eating this. Thus, you're also going to be spiritually protected, if that makes sense, right? Yep. Or basil being for money or luck, right? Carrying a basil leaf in your pocket's going to give you a little bit of fortune. Same thing with olive leaves. Olive leaves make perfect sense when you consider that, like, olive leaves, an olive tree is like back in Greece, basically the lifeblood of like the economy and the world and the food. So like, of course, if you're going to carry that, you're going to be a little bit more prosperous because you have an olive tree, or you have access to an olive tree, which means you have the possibility of getting olives from that tree, which means you're going to be a little bit more prosperous because like that's going to be that. And you understand that those elements are going to add up to make the greater whole, right? Basically like science.
Yep. Devin loves olives. I know he's not here right now. He had to go do something.
You're good.
But when he's watching this for editing purposes, he's gonna be texting me about olives. I need you to know that.
That's okay. Olives are a really powerful plant. Like they're you know, there's a bunch of plants that are really powerful. Like rosemary is powerful. Olives. Olives is really good. There's a reason that olive oil is used a lot. It's a lot. Like there are certain plants that you start becoming really, really familiar with. Same thing with like bay leaves. And it's usually the stuff that was either in our garden or in our kitchens. Yeah. And that it tracks. And olives are just good too.
Yep. Oh, yeah. It's to answer your question from earlier.
Yeah.
Because you unlocked a core memory. The first TikTok that I came across of yours was the wish tales, where you were talking about wish tales.
Wish tales. Which one is that? I'm sorry, you're gonna have to remind me.
I don't remember.
Okay.
I just unlocked a core memory, and I was like, that's where I remember.
Okay, I will have to go back and look and see which one that, because I have over like 400 videos.
Yes, so. It was, you were talking about rhyming stuff and wish tales, and that's where I first came across you. That's where you first came across my For You page.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I appreciate that. Wish tales. Which one? Wish tales. Sorry, now you're like, I'm like, okay, which one is that? But there are so many videos of mine that like I will go back and rewatch my videos every once in a while just to make sure that if I'm going to discuss a topic, I haven't discussed the topic before. Because I want to make sure that with my TikTok, if I'm going to be saying something that's going to be the same, I want to at least go yes and to at least give people more knowledge, because a lot of the times the people who are coming to my channel are newer in the craft. Sometimes you get older people who have been practicing for a while, and I love them. Those folks have some theories, and it's great because I'll see it and I'll be like, I know exactly what book you got that from, right? And I also can launch some debates. Like TikTok has basically helped and hurt witchcraft as a whole. It's definitely spread, because like all of the internet, you know, it's basically the printing press 2.0 at the end of the day, to steal a Hank Green idea. That was his quote. He was like, it's the printing press. And I was like, oh, that's a brilliant way to think of it. I was thinking of the pamphleteering, but okay.
I was thinking of not eating grass.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, you look and like there's a lot of ideas out there that you're like, this is, I understand this philosophy, but I also don't see where you're getting that. And now there's a lot of people who are also newer in the community who don't do their research. Prime example, back in 2020 to like 2021, we had an issue with people sticking selenite and drinking selenite water. Well, selenite's super poisonous, right? Like it dissolves in water, but it's basically glass, and it will like rip up your insides, right? Yep. Or like a lot of the crystals that they were using can have some issues. I mean, that's just a whole issue on everything, because like TikTok made radium glass also popular again, which is also oftentimes used in witchcraft too, right? But that makes sense, because if you're using radium glass, it's a little bit radioactive. Just a tiny hint. So like it's, as long as you don't eat out of it, you're not going to get any radiation per se.
Yeah.
Most likely. Unless you cover your house in the shit, which was what happening. You would see people will have an entire
house collection.
Right. And you're like, yeah, that's not the best. That's not good. Same thing with like witchcraft. You know, there was stuff that I was seeing of being like, oh, this is popping off, and like what is the name of the rock? Malachite, right?
Yep.
Malachite is a negative suck, and I've talked about this on my channel before. Like, it's fine if you're older and you know what you're doing and like you've practiced and you're like, okay, I want to practice with that, right? Like a lot of the time I will talk about things that are going to be a little bit more taboo, right? Like meaning back in the day, Wicca would tell you absolutely fucking not, right? Like don't, like I talk about blood magic. That is a very taboo, it's very taboo topic, right? I talked a little bit about like bone magic, and that's something that's a newer practice for me. That's me finally accepting that kind of aspect. Because for the longest time I was like, no, you can't do that. But I also started having friends who were Appalachian witches, and I started learning a little bit of the Appalachian magic. And again, sometimes that's closed practices and sometimes that's open practices. It just depends on who you're learning from, right? So like if one person says something's closed because like it's their family magic, I understand that. But at the same time, like the same practice is happening all over the place in that area. And sometimes those people who are going to be practicing it are going to teach you, right? Like prime example, like railroad ties around the property, right? That is practiced in Appalachian magic, which is also practiced in like hoodoo and voodoo magic, because sometimes a lot of them have kind of some crossover in that section, because they're working with what would be considered darker magic, because New England was very much a Wiccan territory, right? You can kind of divide that era, like the areas. So like you have the Western, right, California area, which is very much like yogi crystals, right? As I like to call them, the crystal bitches. And that's not like a fault. Like they do a lot of astrology, a lot of stuff, but they're also mixing a lot of Eastern Buddhist philosophies and like Hindu philosophies in with like some Wicca. And also like that's about it. And it's, you know, and it's perfectly good and legitimate and also great, but it's also manifesting, and it's a different way of doing things versus, you know, then you have the Southern where you end up with like hoodoo and voodoo kind of being the rulers, with like Louisiana being like their prime spot, and that's spreading all the way over to like Savannah, right? And Savannah is really kind of a hub between the Appalachian magic of that era and then going down to like the hoodoo and like mixing in, because those people would have been crossing all over the place. And, you know, Appalachia, like you would go through that like that.
Yeah.
That's prime like railroad, you know, like Underground Railroad territory. Like that's the path is right up there. So like that spread, right? That magic spread to there, and then now you have it where it is. Versus like New England area, because it's invaded by the Irish, right? Or not even invaded, but like very much you have the WASP English, the Pilgrims, and their philosophy, and then you also have the Irish coming in and like really taking over that area. You end up with a lot of that magic up there that's very Celtic based, which is a different philosophy, and very much like you still have some of that, but it's a lot more green, as you will. Like when I was first learning witchcraft, you had 3 types of witches. You had white witches, dark witches, or black witches, whatever you want to call them, right? They were dealing with like dark magic. And then you had green witches, right? White was good, green was neutral, and like just dealing with plants. And then black was like dark magic, right? Which is like bad magic. But like it wasn't. It was not, right? That was oftentimes what was labeled as like dark magic was either a little bit influenced by like the Afro movement, right? Like coming in that area, or it was dealing with older magic that was from Celtic, which is dealing with some blood, some bone. And then also you had some of the Germans who showed up, right? And with like Pennsylvania Dutch and that spreading in there too. And like the Norsemen, and that belief system uses a lot of blood, you know? So it depends, if you will.
Okay.
Sorry, I go on tangents.
You're fine.
I'm a yapper.
I have ADHD. We get distracted by food a lot.
Yeah.
So this is pretty much on par. Oh, okay. I'm like just got muted.
Oh, you're good.
But no, we get distracted all the time. You're fine.
Yeah.
I'm completely fine with just an educational video.
I try to be at least a little humorous too, and you know.
Yeah.
You can get me talking and I'm like, all right, let's go. But yeah.
All right. But if you're ready for the next question.
Yeah, I can take the next question.
It's a very serious question.
Okay.
What's going on with Todd?
Oh, with Todd?
Yeah.
I don't know. So here's the deal. Well, I do know and I don't know. There's some things I might say and some things I might not say. Todd, the 2 girls, right? If you've noticed, there's Thom, who is based off of me, but both girls are kind of me, and both girls are neither me. And then there's the roommate, who currently does not have a name. I don't think anyone's ever actually picked up with that, because I've seen a lot of notes about Todd, I've seen a lot of notes about Ashley, but no one's ever noticed that the girl doesn't have a name. But she's never been named. Todd started out as like, because originally the 2 of them kind of started as just being like 2 people who could have discussions back and forth. Since then, there's been a person who has been hyperfixated on a guy.
Yeah.
Right? They've always been hyperfixated on many guys, but there's one guy in particular. She's kind of actually the basis of Ashley. Right? And this girl for years, because I've known her for a while, has been asking me to like give her love spells. And I'm just like, okay. Todd is a good way. I also just like the name Todd. Let's make this very clear. When I first originally started it, I think I called him Tony. Right? And then I realized that I had Tony who's Tony, and I couldn't name 2 people Tony. That would be too confusing. So I went with Todd, and I just like Todd. He also went through the name Toby, Tony, Todd, and I ended up with Todd. And originally it was just like a random character, but people started liking and noticing that there was a random guy outside. He was like really the first time that someone noticed that there was kind of a plot line going through the story. It's gotten to the point that like the reason he hasn't been brought up lately is because like, and Ashley's getting brought in a lot more, is because this girl who wasn't much in my life but always had this issue of being like, oh my god, have you seen that Todd's doing XYZ? And his name isn't Todd. Let me make this very clear.
Yep.
His name shall remain anonymous, because I usually block it out. I can look on my phone and see what it is, but like I don't really want to. And he was kind of a generic basis of being like, people want love spells. All people wanted when I was like that era of 2020 was love spell, love spell, love spell, love spell, love spell. I hate love spells. Like, self-love, great, right? And that's good for you. But like, if you're gonna, and there was also a lot of discussion about doing like love spells and if that tethers a guy to you, right? And what does that mean? Does it mean that if you're using magic on that person, like, is that basically creating a slave, right? And that was like the first time that discussion had really come to light. It had been a little bit in sex magic, right? Which is a thing.
Yeah.
And that was always like a discussion of being like, if the person doesn't know that you're doing sex magic on them, is that an okay thing to do? And then it formed through TikTok into like love spells in general. And I had done a love spell. Todd is also a little bit based on my ex, right? Like the whole like, don't do love spells, like you're gonna make a slave and then like it never ends well. Like that's my own personal experience because I've been a witch forever. I've made dumb mistakes and I will post them online about it, you know?
Yeah.
So that's where Todd kind of bore out of. What's going on with Todd right now? Todd's living their life, doesn't know that this is still happening.
Okay.
Todd has no idea. We may see Todd at some point. Quite possibly we'll see Todd, but I have to figure out how I want to handle him.
Yep.
Because ultimately, in the end of the day, I kind of want this to be a sitcom of just two roommates living together. One's a witch, because that's always kind of, I know from like childhood, that's what I wanted. I loved Sabrina. I loved Charmed. I loved like Buffy. I loved anything that I could get that was like witch media. But they always made it not real magic, right? At some point, someone's going to shoot a fireball out of their hand. And at that point, I'm like, okay, you're falling back into the trope and we're going to end up eating babies at some point. And with Buffy, that, like, they don't eat babies, but they do. Willow goes through a belt that I'm like, or they'll use magic as like a PSA for like drug addiction. And it doesn't always work that way. I only know one person who is a little addicted. And when I say like a little addicted, I mean like they're letting it revolve around their life, right? Like you're not going to get addicted to making your bed using magic. That's not how it goes. You might get addicted to doing tarot cards every single day and then hyperfixating on the tarot cards and hyperfixating on a guy and then like using magic to do that and then ending it not being so great because at some point magic can turn into mania, if that makes sense. Like that's really the danger is like sometimes magic and witchcraft can hide underlining mental health issues.
What is your tea of choice?
My tea? Mint or jasmine.
Okay.
Like straight. Also, so I was raised in a house that is very specifically English breakfast, which is like my mother drinks English breakfast tea like most people drink coffee. And like she has to drink decaf English breakfast, so it's in my house, and it's actually my least favorite tea. But like if I get a nice choice of what my tea is gonna be drinking, I will either be drinking mint because it's like cheap and good, and it like keeps your breath smelling nice. And also it's being in the South, you're always looking for something to keep you kind of a little chill. And in here, like it's super hot. Mint tea is good hot, it's good cold, and it also helps to chill your body out constantly. Which when you're dealing with like 100 and what today is like a 99-degree day outside. So like, and usually in the morning I'm sitting outside, having my cup of tea, and that's something I need. Or it's jasmine. I like jasmine. Love a good jasmine cup of tea. Udon is a noodle. Oolong, not udon. And then I like it varies. If you're talking about like magical tea, nettle. I want nothing. Like mint's good, like mint's for luck, which is also why I drink it. But like if I'm drinking a tea that's going to be magical purposes, it's either probably going to be St. John's wort, right? Mm-hmm. Because St. John's wort is like for health, but it's also to help relieve depression. Mm-hmm. Which coming out of 2020 and all that jazz, we kind of everyone needed that. Because it just kind of has a decent amount of vitamin D in it and like helps you. Nettle, because nettle's like, sorry, my phone went off. Nettle is like good. It's really good tea for you. It also is very protective, and it also is a very much a luck spell, like tea. Nettle is like rosemary. It's a jack of all trades herb, if it makes sense, right? There's certain plants you learn that are like, oh, this plant is for everything. Rosemary tea can sometimes be good. Mm-hmm. It very much tastes like pine needle tea. I don't know if you've ever had that.
I've been camping enough.
Yeah, like if it's long, certain pine needles are poisonous. Let's make this very clear. Don't just go grab pine needles off any tree.
They are acidic, and they actually, I studied ecology, so they will cause the soil around them to become acidic when they fall to limit the competition of other trees in that area, to like kill off the others. So it will primarily be conifers in that area. Right.
So you're already on your way. Look at you. That's already, how do I say this? I always say there's a classification when it comes to like witchcraft and your apocalypse trail, like training, right? So I'm like, in the apocalypse, I'm a very useful person to keep around because I know my medical herbs inside and out. And I also know my gardening. And also like blood packing and all that jazz, because like I very much, when I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to know as much as I can. And I'm also someone who's like, if you can go get modern medicine, go get modern medicine. Go to the doctor. I just didn't have health insurance for a very long time. So I had to I had to start figuring out other ways. When I had the common cold, I could have my Robitussin, but if I also ate some rosemary, it's gonna have a lot of vitamin C and also help you. But no. So like my teas, I take them very serious. Like this, I'll show you a little bit. So like, that's one of my altars, right?
Oh.
This entire thing is nothing but tea, right? Those are all just magical herbs and teas. And that's like my tea cabinet. There's altars in this house everywhere, but that one's like the main magical herb. Right, so like there's a lot of nettle in there. There's a lot of blackberry leaf tea is really good. Mm-hmm. That's just good tea. It has like a nice flavor. So I don't know. I can talk about tea forever. That's one of those things. And I didn't originally. I'm very much a coffee girl, right? Like that's where I started from. Like my mother liked tea. I hated tea except for like herbal green teas, right? And then from there I started like learning about herbalism, and then from there I started drinking the teas, and then was like, oh, this is a good tea, this is a bad tea, this is a good tea. So like mushroom root, right? Which is, if you have a sore throat, there's no better tea than marshmallow root. Yeah. Marshmallow root. Not mushroom root, marshmallow. It tastes disgusting. It tastes like mushrooms. Like ultimately, at the end of the day, like I'm like, I don't understand how this creates marshmallows. Because like that marshmallow root's part of marshmallows, at least originally. And it is the most disgusting tea I've ever tasted. I've tried mixing it with other things, because I often will make my own teas, because I use a lot of loose leaf because of the plants, and like it doesn't taste good. I haven't found anything to cover that scent and that like flavor. That's just like spoiled mushrooms, but also styrofoam somehow. So it just depends on what I'm feeling. Today I went with a nice mint tea, which has been lately my favorite that I've been going with, because I've been having an issue. If you drink too much jasmine too quickly on a empty stomach, it doesn't mix well with your stomach. And there's certain teas that do that. So like if it has a lot of caffeine in it, right? Like a lot of caffeine, if you drink too much too quickly, like your stomach's going to get really fucking upset. And it's not going to be pretty. So stay away from that kind of stuff unless you like have something in your stomach. So like I know like probably I'll have my 2 cups of like mint tea today, and then I'll probably switch to jasmine. And I'll go outside and I'll like eat like 10 tomatoes that I'm growing currently in my garden, because I live in Florida and that's the easiest thing to grow, because I just go get some swamp mud and then
Can I ask a weird question?
Yeah.
You're not eating them like apples, are you?
Oh,
I think she is.
Cherry tomatoes.
Okay, that's better.
They're no, I do eat tomatoes like apples. I have been known to do that. I'm one of those freaks who really likes the flavor of tomato.
Mm-hmm.
I used to smoke cigarettes, and there was nothing better to like the way I quit was like drinking so much tomato juice I could possibly get my hands on. And I don't understand why. I think it was like the acidity of that plus the acidity of like the cigarettes, and it kind of had like a mixed flavor that it like fixed it. So like I now have an addiction to tomatoes.
I guess that's healthy.
It's healthier. I'm not going to get cancer, hopefully, from the cigarettes that I smoked. So.
Can you turn red from tomatoes?
No.
That's
it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like carrots, where like you can turn orange, or like silver where you can turn.
That's from what was that? Oh my gosh, I know the word, but I can't say it. Yeah, that word.
Yeah. No, that doesn't. Tomatoes aren't like that. If it's red, mm-hmm. right? Pigmentation isn't from a specific. It's like a lack of it with it's like being red, and thus it's not going to like apples. You can eat as many apples as you want. You will never turn red if you're eating like a red apple. And that's just because we already have so much red in us that like it doesn't permeate the like skin, I guess, or something. I don't exactly understand the like.
I understand apples better than tomatoes.
Right.
So basically, it's like the ovary.
Right.
And so an apple's just a big fleshy ovary, basically, where it produces the seeds. And it does have a acidic level to it, and that's primarily to protect the seeds. But the pigmentation on the outer part of the skin is primarily glucose.
Okay.
And it more functions as a skin and not so much a protective skin, and not so much as a soft membrane,
the membrane
like a tomatoes.
But if you also like crust the juice out of the tomato, you'll note that tomatoes turn white. Mm-hmm. Like the actual meat of the tomato is white. It's just the juice that's red. And that's just me being like, I eat so many of them that I'm like, oh, look at that, interesting. They're a good plant. They're a very good plant. Apples are actually also, they're considered one of the holiest plants of the entire world. And that's not just including like Christianity. That's like everywhere. If it's an apple. I
used to eat 3 apples a day. Now I have a nickel allergy.
I could not.
And I can only do 5 a week.
Yeah, no. Apples hurt my teeth. Mm-hmm. Like the meat is like something that it just like, it feels bad on my teeth. I like a good apple every once in a while, but like they're not, they're good. They're not quite for me. They also have cyanide in them. And then one of the reasons they're considered like holy for pagans is because if you open it up and cut it, you end up with an actual pentagram. Mm-hmm. Right? As long as you cut sideways, not like diagonally or straight down vertically.
Yep.
So, but yeah.
I think we're ready for the next question.
Okay.
How do the major arcana work in tarot cards?
Okay. So, hold on. They're actually currently under you right now.
Okay.
So let me pick them
up. Sorry for sitting on them.
Yeah, no, literally, like they live on my desk. there's two types of major arcana people like to talk about, right?
Mhm.
There's the actual like major arcana, meaning like, you know, the king, queen, cups, all that jazz, and also like the devil, right? Give that the best I can, right?
It's okay. I'll Google the picture, and how I like to edit now because I've learned how to do it. Is I'll
Well,
put
it's
the
different
picture.
for. Well, the artwork is different for.
Yeah, every
Yeah.
card is different. So
Oh
like,
man.
and every deck is going to be different too. Basically, though, I'm gonna show you the easy thing.
All right.
You have your playing cards. Okay.
Okay.
This is the basis of tarot.
Okay.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, and you can read tarot just as much. It's just missing the major arcana. The major arcana are basically, if you're talking about like the devil and all that jazz, are, you know, hold on, let me find, not my cups. So like your cups, your wands, your coins, and your wands and swords, right? Right. Basically boil down to spades. Spades equal wands. Right. Hold on. I did an entire swords, hearts, spades, wands, cups are spade, clubs. Hold on. Sorry. Clubs equal wands. Spades equal. You think I know this every single time. 1 second. Those two are so, I read them so generic. Anyways, it boils down to both. You have the four, right, like area of the playing cards: clubs, spades, hearts, diamonds. That's the last one I'm forgetting. Diamonds equal like coins, clearly, right? Diamonds, coins. Clubs equal wands, right? Because it's a club versus a club.
Mm-hmm.
Spades equal chalices, and then hearts equal swords, right? And then you have the major arcana, which is going to be like death. Any card that has the actual like little symbols on top, right? That's going to be like the sun, the slot, like they can work differently for each person ultimately, but the main thing about them is that each card tells a story, right? And some of those stories you can see within it, right? So like, for example, the sun, or this one, which is labeled soul, it shows you basically the image. And the basis idea of it is that these are going to be the ones that are going to tell you a little bit more basically what's happening. So like the tower per se is literally just meant to like destruction, right? Like that is you at your lowest point, right? That's you losing your job plus everything else. Versus the devil, right, which is going to not actually, it does not represent the devil. It represents man's chains to like materialism, right? And that kind of greed aspect of it. Versus death, which just means change, right? Like death is never actually a bad thing. If you get a card that's like death, it's good. Why is it that way? Well, tarot's gone through a lot of shit. Started out, right, you have the original playing cards, and tarot's my actually least favorite part to talk about because it's so much and so many people will yell at you about one way or the other. That's a hard one to always talk about. But tarot basically tells you everything you need to know, and it works by basis, but it's also gone through multiple philosophies. So you started out with tarot being playing cards and reading. It can either get traced all the way back to Egypt, right, and like Babylon, or it can get traced back to Jerusalem and actually like, oh God, what is it called? Like, oh God, what is it? The Jewish magic. Oh goodness, the
Magpie?
No, Solomon is part of.
Oh,
With an
Solomon.
H. Yeah, like Solomon magic. And it goes to him. But then it also comes a lot from the like the travelers. I hate saying that word.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that one. The actual name is, oh God, I always use it too because it's actually one of my favorite sects that I love. And that's also a close practice. I can't think now. Romanian is the country. Romania, rum. Hold on one second. I have to Google it now because it's going to bug me up the yin yang.
Roma.
Thank you. The Roma. Or yeah. So thank you. The roamers. And then they take it and they take a hold of it and they start off with the playing cards again, right? The major arcana are kind of an input from Solomon in that kind of era. And they basically tell the story, right? So the tower is actually kind of based on the Tower of Babylon. Ultimately, at the end of the day, anytime you see the tower, it's representation of the Tower of Babylon, and how that falls. And they're each so different that the way to say like how do they work is they're going to be the cards that show up and give you the clearest advice, right? So you might get a general basis from each one of your playing cards, right? Like the King of Spades equals the King of like cups, if I remember correctly. Cups. But at the same time, he's going to be a lot more generic. You can see that he's a king on the palace. So hold on, let me find him in this one. Versus it basically tells you this is what's happening roughly, but at the same time, it's not going to be the most in-depth. Where the ones that are going to get you a lot more in-depth are going to be the major arcana, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Sorry, tarot's such a hard topic to describe about. It's why I don't talk about it a lot on my channel, because
it's okay. I didn't know what to expect when I was going to ask this question.
It's a hard discussion too, because a lot of people have different interpretations of tarot. Mm-hmm. And each person's going to read slightly differently. That mm-hmm. If you say one thing, you might end up with somebody who's going to bite your throat because you said something that isn't. Like I did way back when. I think I actually deleted the video. I think it's one of the 3 videos I've ever deleted in my entire time on TikTok, and it was about the tarot, about the tarot not always being a bad thing, mm-hmm. right? That yes, it's going to hurt and it's going to devastate you, but also it gives you a chance to grow and learn and move on with your life. It just means that time in your life is coming to a collapse, and that basically you can't keep going at the speed you're going. It's the only card I don't truly. There's 3 cards I don't want. One is the sword, 3 of Swords, which is basically you're tied in 3 different directions and you don't know which way to go, right? Mm-hmm. The Tower, which is not a goodie, and then there's the 9 of Swords, which I get a lot, which basically means you're so fucked that you can't even get up from what life is throwing at you. And each one of them, they're not exactly bad, right? And every single person's going to read slightly differently. But I ended up with someone screaming at me, telling me that I don't know anything and I'm a bad witch and how dare I? And it was the first time I had ever dealt with that. You know, I had dealt with people disagreeing. I wasn't canceled. It was just their first negative comment I had ever gotten. And it hurt me. And I was oh my God, maybe I'm so wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And then I got rid of that one and deleted that episode. And then not even a month later, I redid it and re-uploaded it. And then people loved it again. And again, it was just the first time I had ever received a bad comment. So tarot's that one thing. Then I'm I'll talk about it. I'll say, oh, it's give a little wisdom. But there's also so many that do it that it's a hard thing to cut it's like an astrology. I'm not an astrology girly. I make no defense that I'm not. I know what my signs are. I know what that means. But if you were to be I'm an Aquarius rising with a Pisces sun and a, you know, Taurus moon, I'd be like, okay, cool. That's exciting. Because not every witch practices everything in the arsenal. Some people are a lot more into some things than other. Tarot is that thing that I love, but also I'm very much self-taught. I read the books, but I don't put as much stock in the books as most people do. I think I'm going to tell you, go buy your tarot deck in person. Do not buy it online. Do not buy a tarot deck that you cannot physically touch either. Like if they're like, oh, you can't pull it out of the box before you buy it, don't buy that tarot deck. Because even if you like the artwork that you see on the box, you might not like how the cards feel. You might not like what anything like that does. And like the major arcanas are going to be like the devil, which I just opened up to because he shows up a lot for me, is going to be like your big road signs. That's your stop. Look, like you turn up ahead, right? But again, they can lie. Tarot can lie because everything is like objectivity and figuring it out. So, and also like if someone touches your deck, like I'm very much like no one is allowed. So I have two different decks. I have my actual, like this is the deck I read for people with, which I don't read for people with tarot anymore usually. Usually I'm going to either be using runes or bones to read for you. And that's just because when you read with tarot, people sometimes like to see what they're reading and they'll take their opinion and they won't listen to what you're saying. Whereas if you're reading with runes, most of the time people aren't as adept or at least have a basic knowledge, right? Someone sees death come up in their card, they're going to think they're going to die. And I'm so sick of having to explain to you that like death doesn't mean death. The only reason you would die is if you have a banshee like in your ear screaming you're gonna fucking die. And like even then, doesn't always mean that it's gonna show up because shit can get weird. And it might not be for you. So yeah, sorry. My tarot is not, that discussion is not always the best.
You're fine.
Yeah,
when
no,
you
you're
went
fine.
to
We're just
college,
curious.
Yeah. What?
you want to go first or you want me to go first?
I'll go first, Archon. We were just curious about him, so that's why we written it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I use it. It's just not my favorite. It's good.
I know when we went to college, my family plays gin rummy a lot, also known as Egyptian rummy. And then we met a guy, very interesting guy. But he was very sold that straight rummy was the only way to play, and that it was the right way to do it.
Yeah.
You had to play it straight, and I was like, well, gin rummy you can do straights and multiple, and then we're playing, and then this guy comes up and goes, "Oh, you guys are playing rummy? What type of rummy is this? I only know Spanish rummy," and there was so many different ways to play.
Yeah, no, like
game.
I'm a gin rummy too, girl. Like that's where I grew up playing. So like, but I know that straight rummy exists, and I didn't even know there was Spanish rummy. Like the card games, those suckers, like it's all born out of these suckers. Like ultimately, at the end of the day, anytime you're handing like a card, it's that people were reading with these originally. And then from there, other people started adding to it and being like, okay, you know, the 6 of Hearts isn't exactly a good card, but like, you can't get that from here. So we need something that's going to be a lot more obvious for when I'm going to be reading for people. What is it going to look like? Because I prefer reading with playing cards, and that's just because they're not as in depth. So I don't have to. When you're reading for people, it's really hard because you might get something and you might understand that they're not going to take it, right? The amount of times I read tarot and I'll be like, this is what the tarot's saying, and the person just ignores what my warning is frustrating because they're like, but that's not what that card means. And I'm like, okay, the cards are subjective. I understand that you read a book, but like a book can only get you so far. And also every person has different, whoever teaches you is going to teach you a different thing. Right? We didn't have those books until very like modern like day. Right? Like they're not that old. Tarot's old, but the books are most likely I think the earliest tarot one I found was from like 1918, and it was a spiritual like book, and it just had a section on tarot, and it was really an occult book that was dealing with like the dead, and being like a medium, which is fine. I also personally am a little worried about tarot because it's been so like pushed on the forefront, which it always is. I get it. It's the clearest like way to tell if someone's a witch. Oh, you have a tarot deck, you're a witch, right? It's like having a wand if you're like a Harry Potter fan, or like a wand as a witch. Like I have a lot more than tarot, and there's a lot of other ways you can read, but like tarot's the thing, and it's also semi-scary, and it has sometimes a bad rap. Like look in Hollywood right now, there's a movie out that's a horror movie about the tarot deck. And ultimately it's just it's just basically Final Destination using the tarot and the major arcana. I promise you though, I've met some tarot decks that are cursed. I've never met a tarot deck that is going to awaken and then the priestess, which makes no sense that the priestess would come out and like kill you. Let me make this very clear. That girl, she is nothing bad. Like that's not a bad card. So like some of the cards that they're choosing, I'm like, okay. Could have done another workshop writing wise of just there's a lot of times when you're watching movies, especially horror movies, and you realize no one on the thing is a witch, like at all. Which is always when I'm like, okay, I want, I'm currently in development of writing a horror movie that's on witchcraft, but is actually from the side of like the witch and dealing with a town of like Christians. Right. And like, what is that horror? Because that's a horror. Like, let's be very clear. You want to embrace like American fear. Show the otherness. Like you have all of that, and witches have been targeted. Like they're the first ones, not the first. Well, they actually natives. They're
there's a very long list of that.
Yeah, they're one of the first ones to go, right? And they're always in the mix, right? Just like the LGBTQ plus community will always end up being in the mix. The witches are always going to end up being in the mix, unless they're specifically like there's a few times in American history that they've been overlooked, right? And that's really the hoodoo and voodoo communities, and they've also like suffered a lot, but it's not solely just because of their religion or solely just because they're practicing magic. And like I love these things, but like I can't have people touch them. Like these specifically, I had someone touch my tarot deck, and now I haven't used them since, and I have to cleanse them because girly shouldn't be touching shit, but girly touches shit, which is mainly one of your issues when you're a witch, that a lot of stuff can't be touched that you own, but people think it's cool and they want to touch the wand that they see. They want to touch the cool sword that's in the corner of the room, right? They want to touch the playing cards. They want to touch the like things. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. And I get it, but I also have a lot of stuff that I have to do on top of that. And with like playing cards, I can't put them in water to like cleanse them. So hopefully that helps. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I'll go off.
No, you're fine. That answers our questions.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. You got me. Sorry, you said something about you have a sword.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's something called what is it called? I always just call it my spiritual sword. So I actually, hold on one second.
There's some type of religion or practice that uses swords, and I can't remember what that is.
Hey, Kyle.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to delete question. This is going to be my question number 5. I want to see the sword.
I have the sword right here. So this is my so like it's literally a sword. I don't show it on TikTok because like blades on TikTok
you'll get demonetized.
Right, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So and he, he is an actual like Union soldier sword. When he came to me, he was in 3 pieces and I had to rebuild him.
Cool.
So, I polished, you can't tell now because he's not used as much, but like if I'm blessing, it's called an Thom. It's a spiritual sword. It's basically a wand, right? The only aspect that's a little different is because it's an actual blade, it's going to be a little bit more powerful, right? Because like you're channeling your magic into like a weapon, right? So like it's usually used either in ceremonial rituals, meaning like you need blood, which I don't. This sucker does not get that. He's mainly just used for my protection rituals when I need to go outside, and I will sit there with a sword in one hand and a like very much does this wand in one hand, sword in the other, right? Do my blessings, pound my sword into the ground, and then proceed to draw my lines using my sword. Very much like ritual uses for this sucker. But like a lot of witches will have them, right? And usually they're for purposes that are going to be either protection. Sometimes you might find one who might use one in a curse every once in a while. I don't think you should use that because that's a little too powerful for using for curses. Because if you're using a literal weapon, that's like you're going to draw blood at that point, and that's when you get into like, okay, maybe don't do that. There's a difference between like cursing someone to have bad luck, and some of the shit I've done with curses is not great, but I also understand that and try not to, and the point you have to get me to in order for me to curse you is pretty intense. But I also know some people who do, and they oftentimes will also use them to like cut themselves and use for blood magic, which is usually, if you're going to see a representation of them in media, that's how you're going to see them. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the what is it? Not Charmed. Craft.
Covenant. It came out like in the early 2000s, maybe 2009.
Yeah, the Craft, the Coven. They often, like the Coven specifically has a scene where they like cut themselves using a Thom and then like pour blood into their like thing. And it's a spiritual blade that you use in your craft. Ultimately, it can be any blade. It can be a little knife, or it can be up to a sword. I just always used my sword, and like at this point, he's not even sharp enough to actually cut you. He's just for ceremonial purposes at this point. Or if someone breaks into my house and like I need to like defend myself, I can still poke and stab you. I still have some way of defense. So, but yeah, it's just a magical sword that has multiple spells written on it.
Okay, let me ask you this. What are some important plants and herbs you've used in your practice?
So we already talked about a few of them. Rosemary is a huge one. Grow rosemary by your like front door. That's good. Grow mint by your front door. That's going to bring money to your front door. Bay leaves are everywhere out throughout this entire house. One, because they stop bugs, but two, they're also for protection, right? You put a bay leaf or bay water, leaf water, any kind of like bay, as long as it's soaked in that and you get the juices out of that plant, and you sprinkle it on your like walls, that's going to give you protection. Mugwort's really good. Mugwort is a huge one. That's for like psychically increasing. So like if you want to have prophetic dreams, you want to increase your power, mugwort's going to be a biggie, and that's like you can drink that as tea. It's a little dangerous if you drink too much of it. You can, poison yourself, but you just have to be like understand that like a pinch is going to be just as enough. You don't have to like drink a gallon of mugwort. That's not going to be good. What else? Mother's wort is a huge one. Especially living in the South, mother's wort is a huge one because mother's wort is basically Plan B for females.
Oh.
Fun fact. And it also is very good for like just keeping you regular as well. So like that's a huge one that I keep, not for me so much as like sometimes I have friends who are like, I need some tea. And I've talked about that on my channel too. So like, let the government go for me. I will come back with my religion, like protection. Look up. I have an entire ritual written about that. That's a big one. And it used to not be as much, but because we're in Florida and Florida is going insane, that's a little bit more.
I was gonna say it's Florida.
Yeah. No, that's why, and that's the nice thing is that like oftentimes because they're medical plants, people don't know, and also because they're classified as like mother's word's a perfectly fine plant. Like it's only bad. It just washes out you, right? Just it keeps you regular. So like as long as you're not like 10 months pregnant, don't drink that. Like once it can no longer just like be a miscarriage, don't do that. But like it's fine. What's another one? I'm trying to think. Nettle's a huge one. That's a heightening protection. That's a really good one. I use that a lot. Blackberry leaves I use a lot. I use a lot of northern plants. Holly, the oak. So my most important plant of all is oak, right? And that's because like I work with the oak king. So like I personally cannot live anywhere where there's not an oak tree. I need oak trees. Like it doesn't matter what kind of oak tree. It can be white, it can be live, it can be, European, it can be English, whatever kind of, because there's so many. But as long as that type of tree is going to be there, I'll be fine. But if that tree's not there, we have issues. And that's because oak is like, it's for protection, it's for healing. It's kind of like rosemary. You can use it in most things. It's a heightening plant. But also because the deity is so linked and so attached to it that, yes, child, I hear you. But because the like plant is so linked to the deity itself, that it's going to be a lot more powerful. Also, I work with the deity a lot. So like I'll go and like whisper things. Like I don't know if you've ever watched like my like go tell a tree video where it's like, oh, you want, Ashley's done something bad and you need to like, you and Ashley are in a fight, go tell a tree what Ashley's done and have that happen. Like that's straight up dealing with and working with the Oak King. And he's also one of the most chill, welcoming of the deities. Like it does not matter who you are or like what your religion is. Like he's just like, I'm here, I'm living my life, we're gonna be here and not have an issue. But also like, tell me the tea. Tell me what you want, because not a lot of people hug trees, but like people don't usually talk to trees. Like that's kind of a newer, it's an old philosophy, but it's just recently come back into like the forefront of people thinking about it and not being like, oh, you're a crazy tree hugger, if that makes sense. So those are some of my favorite plants I've dealt with. I've also have mandrake. I use mandrake sometimes. Mandrake's pretty good for healing. Mandrake's pretty good for protection, just not eating, as I said before. Delicious Dungeon, I love you, but don't eat mandrake. Please just, sorry, that's my one pet peeve every time, because I love this show and then I'm like, I hate that you're, just choose another plant. There's so many. And there's some like mushrooms are good, but like mushrooms are dangerous because they oftentimes represent the Fae, right? And that, like, if you think of like a fairy ring being a mushroom circle, like, and not stepping into that, like there's reasons for that also, and you can track that also back to understanding that like oftentimes if it was a ring of mushrooms, depending on the type of mushrooms and where you were in the world, if you stepped in it, you were stepping in the like the whole mushroom, and you could get the spores, brought it up, and then like you could pass out and die, depending on what type of mushroom ring it was. So like that's honestly, besides like the Fae just like planting them and doing that, like you can track and see. Also, sometimes mushrooms are actually linked to Fae. Like you have the little red caps, which are, if you think of like little red caps, they started out as mushrooms and they oftentimes hide as mushrooms. But like the idea is like with those little creatures. In order for them to stay alive, they have to keep their little red hats like wet and damp and blood. Right? Now, usually it's just like dead animals that they come across that they're going to wash their blood, but like it can be humans, right? That's oftentimes, if you hear about, like in Sweden, oftentimes if someone goes missing and walks in the woods, they stumbled upon a little red hat, which have now lately been determined to be like what people call gnomes sometimes, but they're not gnomes. So I don't know. It just depends. What?
Aspergillus.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just depends.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So let me ask you this: how do deities work? How do deities choose and communicate with you? Yes, I think. Like I said, I can't read.
No, you're good. You're good. So here's the deal: deities, gods, right? Because ultimately, the word deity just means God, and there's multiple degrees, right? As I like to say, this is really a plethora kind of way of looking at it. Any god is a deity. Any fae has the possibility of being a deity, right? Because when Christianity came through, right, especially in like Celtic, Norse, like all those things, they turned their gods, their deities, if you will, either into saints or into the fae, right? So like leprechauns are not what leprechauns you and I like think of as leprechauns. Like they are deities. Like if you've read Good Omens, you know that fact, right? Like that Neil Gaiman's pretty, it's not great, but he also was pretty decent in like his understanding of deities. How they talk to you, okay, there's multiple ways people go about it. Some people use candles and like ask the candles question and then interpret what candles say. I don't think that's a good way, but that's just because candles aren't always the best at like, okay, the wick's messing up. Does that mean my god's angry at me, or does that mean that like the wick is just that the candle isn't as good as it should be, right? I meditate. That's how I usually talk to my deities, or I will go out to the Oak King and I'll just literally have a conversation with him. And it looks like you're insane if you do that, but like it can work. I'll go sit outside and look at the moon and have a conversation with it. And if it answers, it's going to be mentally. It's going to be like your own voice coming into your head and being like XYZ, or like someone else's voice coming in and being like, this is your issue, right? Just like how people work with the big God, right? When you pray to him and people get answers back to him from him, it's the same kind of way. Because ultimately, the big God is also just a deity at the end of the day, right? He's just one of many. And depending on which deity you work with, it's going to have a different way of responding and talking and all that jazz. So like, I don't know if you're working with Loki, because let's name Loki because he's a popular deity. Depending on, sorry, my cat's on my box. But depending on what your interpretation of like Loki's going to be, you might end up with different things. Like some people might see Loki and just see like a bunch of magpies and take that as a sign, right? Some people might meditate and have Loki come to them. Some people might have Loki come to them in their dreams as Tom Hiddleston, right? It all depends. Some people, when it comes to working with deities, ultimately you have to understand that all the power that you're drawing from is from that actual entity itself, that deity, that god, whatever you want to call it. And it comes back to that. If you're talking about me specifically, because I have 3 gods, right? Like those are my 3 main gods, and I work with deities that I classify under there. So like my big 3 gods, which is Luna, Solas, and the Mother, right? Which is the Mother is Earth, right? And like that energy, that entity, that whatever you want to call that, right? The universe, whatever your term is. Then there's Solas, who's the sun, and then there's Luna, who's the moon. Solas is very much that masculine. Luna is that very much that feminine. So Lost represents both in my mind, like the lover and the father, if you will, like two sides of the same coin. He can also be angry and aggressive and the warrior. Just like how the sun can. The sun can be a lover to you, but he can also destroy you and give you a drought, like how Florida's in right now, right? Because you're not paying attention to the needs in the world. Same thing with the moon. Like the moon can be super, super nice, but like sometimes the moon can be a little bitch, and Luna can sometimes cause you to have a tsunami. They're like a rogue huge wave, right? Depending on like just because like ultimately it controls. So like I understand with me, like all the powers from all the deities to me, doesn't matter what deity it is, comes from like the energy of the earth and the mother, right? And that's just because like she is the thing that gives us life. Like we cannot exist without this thing, ultimately. And every other deity, depending on what they are, represent aspects of the bigger whole. But that's just my own personal belief. And when I'm drawing my power from those entities, I understand that like I am a tiny, tiny, tiny little section. I'm not even an ant. I'm like a flea beyond a flea. I'm a flea on a flea. Just using a little bit of their power, and then eventually I'll die and go back to them. If you're working with Loki, you're getting your power from Loki. If you're working with the Morrigan, you're getting your power from the Morrigan. And when you're asking things from them, then you have to understand that they can answer, and they can either answer you positively or they can answer you wrong. Like, you know, just like how the big God, you might ask for something and he might grant that prayer. He also could teach you a lesson, right? Same thing with all deities. Like ultimately at the end of the day, you have to understand that you're working with gods and what they say goes. So it just depends. I also understand that if you're working with them, you need to show respect. You also need to make sure that like you're giving them devotion, because ultimately they're going to feed off of that devotion, right? Think you know, a good example of that is like American gods. Ismail, child, I love that you're on your box, but we're going to have you hop off right now. We're going to have you hop off. I'm sorry, babe. Go lay on the
box.
Don't feel bad. This one keeps going.
He's got his wiener out.
This one keeps going.
He was sitting on his box, legs up in the air, like enjoying himself, but also making like a bunch of noise. So I was like, okay. And I'm trying to make him understand that when the lights are on, he doesn't like it. That he's like, well, once the lights are on, you're filming, and I have to be quiet, and I just want to be noisy. He's about 1.
Well, they usually do good. Today they've just been bad. No, yeah. I'm not giving.
No, he's usually great. He woke up in a state of like zoomies. So he just wants to zoom. He wants to go outside currently, but because it's so hot, I'm like, we're not going outside. Maybe when it gets almost at dusk, but he also wants to attack the book, because I have like 2 collections of books that I got. That I asked for. I did a prosperity spell, and I inherited a bunch of books that ultimately, at the end of the day, are worth like a pretty fucking penny.
I saw that TikTok this morning. I was like, huh.
What?
I saw that TikTok skit this morning.
Yeah. No, they're still currently sitting in my house. Love that. I hate it, but I love it. You know, I have to just bring them somewhere and get it. I was trying to do it via eBay, but like the book like collection and book talk has like destroyed eBay, and eBay doesn't do as well as eBay used to do. So I also, you know, I've sold a bunch of military books on eBay, but that's about it. not those, you know, $2,000-$3,000 books. And that's just because no one wants to spend that much on eBay, which I get. So I have to bring it somewhere. But he's currently lounging on them, wanting to make noise. But yeah, no, it's just, that's how you work with deities. It's very much the same way, even if you were a Christian, how you work with the big God. It's just, you have to understand that sometimes the gods don't have time to deal with your shit, unlike the big God, who's like, no, I will answer every prayer. Except he doesn't. But, you know, he says he will, right? Depending on who you ask. as a pagan witch, you have to understand that that's not the case, and that's why they gave us witchcraft in the to begin with. Everything that they gave us, ultimately, they gave us so we can use. Doesn't mean that we have to use it to the end degree, like how we are now, and like ending up and destroying the world. But don't smoke cigarettes as much as like the next person and get cancer. But also, cigarettes are a very like holy, spiritual like herb, and oftentimes good for trances. Same thing with like marijuana. Like they've been used in spiritual practice and working with deities forever. Is it to a such degree that like it's not the same kind of marijuana that we were smoking nowadays, where it's like changed and hybrid and all that jazz? But that plant's a magical plant, right? So you just have to understand. And I'm not saying take ayahuasca. Let me make this very clear. Don't take ayahuasca. Don't take anything that's going to change your mental state, because honestly, at the end of the day, you don't know if that's just your psychology doing that to you and the like drugs, or if that's the deity, right? I don't know. It's all about interpretation too. I hope that helps. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
You've ever seen Supernatural?
Yep. Oh, hold up. You know what?
You said one of our secret phrases.
if you've ever seen Supernatural, there it is. Yep.
I have the first 12, and I just pulled out my favorite season, season 5 as well.
Yep, and that's a real occupation. People do that. There's a lot more in the Bible Belt. Let me make this very clear. Like that, I don't mess with those people.
I feel like a lot of that vigilante justice too.
Yeah, it gets really kind of scary, really fucking dark, really quickly.
What about dead people?
Sorry, I love Supernatural. I'm actually rewatching it. I didn't, I was like, I did not finish Supernatural when it ended during the pandemic, so like I'm binge watching it, and I'm on season 4.
I'm on the last season.
Are you okay for the like what's coming?
What do you mean?
Are you okay for the?
We've both seen the last season.
Okay.
But neither of us have finished the last season.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was like, are you a Aziraphale Dean? Aziraphale? What's his name? Aziraphale?
No. You're thinking of
Good Omens.
What is it? Castiel?
Yeah, it's Castiel.
Yeah.
Castiel.
DCL. That's the word.
Yeah, DCL.
Devin didn't see it coming.
I did not see it coming, but I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna watch it all the way through, and I'm so glad that they made God such a dick.
Oh yeah.
I kind of enjoy it.
Oh, 100.
But at the same time, I hate Chuck. I didn't like Chuck from the very beginning, but it makes sense. So
Nobody liked Chuck from the beginning.
No. Like Supernatural's that show. I have a love-hate relationship with Supernatural. I hate Supernatural, but I also love Supernatural. I hate it because like I feel for the creatures, because I'm like, at the end of the day, I've known people who do that occupation, and I know that they're not just coming for like the vampires and the werewolves and the banshees and all that shit. They're also coming to the witches, and like that's fucking terrifying. Like it's terrifying. But and it made it a lot more popular too. Like the witch hunter did not exist. Like it existed, but like not as much as a big thing until Supernatural came out. And then like because that aspect came back up, people were like, we're gonna do this. And then they also started messing with shit that they shouldn't probably have been messing with. And that's how you end up with like haunted houses that are cleansed but not actually cleansed because people didn't know what they were truly doing. And then you walk into a hot mess.
Okay.
Like, yeah, no, like if you can tell when a place has been cleansed by a church, because it just ultimately feels like there's a sheet thrown over the entire house, right? Versus when someone who was a hunter or like an exorcist per se, supernatural person, goes in and does it, and like they're very different versus like someone who's just using sage. Like there's different levels that you can feel the energy, right? Churches is like basically blanket thrown over your entire face. Like that's the most, like if you walk into a place and it just feels empty, that's when you're like, church. There's no energy here. That's a priestess one. Versus when you feel something, and then sometimes when shit gets like really, really fucking bad, you're like, someone messed with something that they shouldn't have fucking messed with, and they did something, and they tried to cleanse it, and they just didn't know what the fuck they were doing. And that's when you run into that. And I've had a few of those people who have shown up and been like, oh, you're a witch. Can you sage my house for me? And coming from Massachusetts, like, there's a lot of haunted shit. Like, you're in Atlanta. I'm sure there's equally as haunted shit. You're in South Georgia, like, equally as haunted fucking shit. I don't know if you believe in that area, but, like, you've definitely felt somewhere.
We went to a school that was from the 1800s.
Yeah.
So
we've seen some stuff. We've seen some stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm always like, when you live in an area that's old, you've seen some shit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've seen some shit do some shit that shouldn't have. And I also, like, when I worked in Key West, I worked as a ghost host. My coworker was Robert the Doll. I had to get interviewed by Robert the Doll. Who were like, if you
a ghost host?
Yeah. So, like, ghost tours. Like, if you go over to Savannah, HTA, like, you see the ghost tours. Like, I did that. That was my job.
Oh, that's not the weirdest thing for this interview.
It's not the weirdest thing, but at the same time, I got a little confused. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, no, that was what my title was ghost host. Right? I don't exactly understand why. I really don't know why they decided to choose that title, because I was playing a ghost and I was hosting you, I guess. So they just decided to call it a ghost host. But, like, when you do that job, you have to, like, get interviewed with, like, whatever the highest thing you're dealing with. Right? So, like, I know HTA, part of my interview when I was working in Key West was to go, like, I got the job. I could not start the job or even get the job correctly until I had to go introduce myself to Robert the Doll, who is a doll. Let's be very clear. It is a doll. And you have to be like, hi, my name is XYZ. They want me to work here. I just want to make sure that, like, that is okay. Is that okay? If it is not okay, show me a sign on the way home, right? And, like, people haven't gotten jobs because, like, a bus tire has broken down. Right? Like, a bus broke down on someone who was about to get hired, and they were like, oh, Robert said no, right? And they, like, did it. So, like, I had to work with that. And, like, I've seen some shit. He's not the scariest shit, but, like, I've seen some shit from that day. And that's why I'm like, I don't you want me working with the dead? No, I don't work with the dead. That's no. Right? I literally worked with the dead. I don't need to do it ever again. Because, like, shit gets real. And shit can get real very fast. Because you sometimes can see a chair fly against a wall.
I've seen that several times.
Yeah. Like, that's not unusual.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that shit can get aggravated if you have someone who doesn't know what they're doing because they think they do, and a lot of the hunters. But yeah. Anyways.
Got 2 more questions.
Okay.
What advice would you give to aspiring witches that you wish you knew when you started?
1, don't be afraid. Sorry, I have a cat going in the back. 1, don't be afraid to, like, practice when you don't exactly know what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And that be as basic as, like, whatever. 2, learn as much as you physically can. And not just about magic, but, like, about all aspects. If you're going to be dealing with witchcraft, ultimately, look at the lore. And not just lore that's, like, in your area, but lore all around the world. And that's because, like, a lot of the actual craft can be hidden in that lore. That was something I had to discover for myself. Like, I had to root through a lot of folklore in order to figure out certain aspects. Also, understand it's not terrifying. Like, it's not a bad thing. Like, what I wanted more, and I knew witches growing up. Like, I was very blessed that, like, my mother had friends who were witches and, like, wanted me to bring me to a coven. which I always knew like that wasn't for me, because like I'm not Wiccan, and also like I didn't want someone else's beliefs to change my belief. But also don't be afraid to like not just like, you're never going to be a bad witch. There's no such thing as a bad witch. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, being a bad witch, unless you're literally going to like sit there and be like, I don't know, turn on someone and be like, that person's a witch, and like have them burn, like, you're not going to be a bad witch. Just don't do shit that's going to be totally like totally bad. Like you not, you know, if you practice something and you don't think that you know enough about one aspect of the craft, that's perfectly acceptable. You don't have to know every single aspect of every single little thing. You know, I don't need to know. Sorry, he's eating a, hey, good boy. You know, you don't have to sit there and like know every single aspect of the craft to the point of being like, I know exactly what this 2 of clubs means every single second of the day. You don't need to know that. I know every single aspect of every single plan. You don't need to know that. Like, just have a general knowledge is okay. And not everything's going to fit you, right? Sometimes it might not work to be, you know, a green witch, or you can move on. Labels are not something. Don't expect, like, you don't need to look witchy. You don't need to do any of that stuff. What would have really helped is to have, like, you know, I was lucky. I was in like Lori Cabot area of woods, which is like high priestess and like basically the founding witch of Salem, at least new witches of Salem, right? So like being in that neck of the woods, I had a actual like modern witch who was like a witch, but like sometimes her philosophy and my philosophy differ a lot. Doesn't mean I'm any less of a witch than her, right? And that's like my biggest tea is like I oftentimes will see people like start fighting in my comments, especially of my bigger videos. Like they'll fight and have full out wars about what makes them a real witch. And I want to get involved, but I also know I can't get involved, because if I were to get involved and like call out somebody, like that person's going to be like, oh my God, I'm not a real witch. I don't know anything. Right. Versus if I do call it, and I don't like it. Like there's someone who's like, on my rope video, they said like brain rot, and they just start like spilling vicious fucking shit. And I if I see a really bad like comment, I'm just deleting that shit. Like I'm not gonna get involved. I'm just gonna delete it. And that's just because like I don't want that. Like I don't even want like positivity. Like I'm very neutral. Like say what you want, say what your belief is, all that jazz. I want a place that's going to be healthy for people to share and like have a community that they can work with and understand that, yeah, you can be part of a community, but you don't have to be like part of a coven, and that other things are out there, right? Like the idea of just even knowing that there's like a community of witches, because ultimately at the end of the day, at least back in like 2020 in the very, very beginning, so like before the kind of re-rise of the witches, we were like pagan witch, right? Other, as you call it, or 0.006, right, % of the population. So like tiny that it doesn't matter. We've roared. We've definitely shown ourselves, and that's also including the Satanists, which are also not evil. That's another thing. There's nothing truly that's evil out there. Even demons, depending, like, be careful. Don't just rust into something and be like, I'm gonna go work with Baal, like I'm gonna go work with Lucifer and nothing's gonna go wrong. Do your research, but like understand that like oftentimes those elements were demonized because of Christianity and trying to like turn other people's religion into things, or they were like egregores, right? So like the entity might not be the best, but like if it calls you, that's fine. But like I'm not a Satanist. I don't work with that pantheon. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot. There's so many lessons that I try to like dissertate. If I were to boil it down to like one key aspect that I would want people to know is like, you're not alone. If you're a witch, do what you need to. Practice what you need to, what draws you in first and foremost. And you're never going to be less than a witch. If you say you're a witch in my book. Just don't be like a terrible human. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
I do have a question though.
Yeah.
Egregore is like where it's like the accumulation of like popularized belief.
Yeah. So
like Santa.
Yeah, like Santa. Yeah, you watched that video. Yeah.
Yeah.
Santa, Lilith, technically Lucifer nowadays.
Yes, because originally that was from a play.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's
all. He's all based off of Byron. Ultimately, like that archetypal character is now based off of Byron. It's all mitzvah, like especially in that lore, like it's mitzvah, which is the practice. It's a Hebrew practice of basically creating fan fiction about the Bible, but like in a religious kind of mood and setting that you're like basically filling in the holes that the Bible didn't go through. And mitzvah happens all over the place, but like it actually becomes canon in that one. So that's when you get a lot of weird, like I find the Abrahamic religions fascinating as like the lore goes, and I'm like, this is an interesting how the amount of gymnastics you have to do in order to get to these points and like understand, but like, you know, because if you actually read everything, you'll understand with like Dante's Inferno and everything that like technically if it is true and it is mitzvah, because it is mitzvah, that technically you just become a slave to God when you die and you become happy in your servitude. And that's according to Dante's Inferno. It's according to Dante, so it doesn't mean it is true, but it also means that it's mitzvah because it's the act, and that act crossed over into Christianity, and it gets really confusing. But yeah, no, an egregore ultimately is anything that is all deities are egregores, right? If something exists, right? Like you could become an egregore, right? Kyle becomes popular enough, people start worshiping Kyle, but like Kyle disappears, right?
Are we talking about the Kyle punching drywall or me?
Both, whichever one.
Okay.
That you can separate into two different versions of yourself and into different egregores, and then those things become ideas, and then poof, they become like actual deities. And like really, because like ultimately, is it the belief that is fueling the gods and making the gods, or is it the gods exist and then humans are like fueling the power, right? Like that's what an egregore truly is. And that's a debate between egregores of like, in the egregore discussion of like, is it belief and then that thing's born, or is it that thing was already there but then the belief became and founded it and then discovered it? For most of time it was that way. It's just now recently kind of become being like, well, wait, what about what about that thing that always existed? And that's really hounded by the Lilith like girlies, and that's because they don't want their girly to like spring out of Yahweh. They want her truly to be older than that, like mythology, or lore, or whatever you know, theology, whatever you want to call it. Because everyone wants to get back to like the very, very beginning. Ultimately, that's like I have my thing about like Babylon, right? That's why other people have their thing about like Egypt or Greece or, you know, Japan, and like it's all, you're all trying to get back to like the very, very beginning and start of like looking at the basis, because people are always looking for answers, and history can sometimes provide those answers, and sometimes we see history through rose-tinted glasses a lot of the time, right? Like Rome was probably equally as fucked as America is now. Ultimately, it's just we don't recognize it. So yeah.
Okay, Devin.
All right. Well, that's our last question for you, Thom. This is pretty much our outro for our episodes. Okay. So where can the people find you at home? If they want to check out your content.
Yeah, no problem. So you can go to my TikTok, which is a girl named Thom. Thom. There's my YouTube, which is also a girl named Thom, Thom. And then my Instagram is also a girl named Thom, Thom. So you can find me at any of those locations. I am hopefully promo going to be releasing a full-length YouTube video, whatever that means nowadays. That is hopefully going to come out in the next month or two. As soon as I finish editing that 6-hour beast down to about 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. So.
Okay.
But thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Aha, here you are. Boom. And a followed on our Instagram.
Huzzah.
Okay.
And that's getting every single day, that's getting uploaded and uploaded and uploaded. It's just when you have 400 videos, there's no easy way to cross platform. And realizing you need to cross platform because you don't know if your platform that you're going to be on is going to be still around in like 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
we have like a big list of people who are like, we should hit this person up and try like ticking off different boxes of different types of things.
Yeah.
To like have a variety, have something random. And then we were like, oh, TikTok news. Let's speed line a couple of these people.
Yeah, because like at the end of the day, I quite possibly could lose 4 years worth of work in one law that just got passed. And I'm sitting there in a limbo being like, okay, but I make a decent chunk of money off of TikTok. And if you take away that income source, like I count TikTok as one of my jobs. Like ultimately at the end of the day, like this is a job for me. So now you're taking that away. Okay, great. Well, there's no way I can like re-upload. Like I can re-upload everything, but like I can't get my following back. And it's already hard enough to get your following onto another platform. So, you know, you're trying and trying and trying. So it's just that wheel, and I'm trying to push it out more. But Instagram's hard because they don't give you money. And also they don't particularly like witchcraft. And YouTube doesn't particularly like that. That's one of the nice things about TikTok is that TikTok was like the only one that really embraced the community to the full extent that like you actually had many people. So that now that that's going away, it's a little like, okay, but there's nowhere that you can fill in that like thing because it's not as communicative and people don't watch it as much. And you might follow a creator that you like on YouTube that's like a witch talk creator, but like they're not always going to be good. So vote in the next upcoming election so we don't lose TikTok, I guess. That's my push. But yeah.
I think that's a good thing to plug.
I will always plug voting.
Yep.
So don't care. Yeah.
But yeah. As always, guys, you can also check out my sports podcast, More Sports, where Kyle's actually wearing the merch. An example of our episodes, we worked with the new Kraken Pro Wrestling. They're located here in Tipton, Georgia. # release the Kraken. Go check them out and things like that. Always listen to our episode Popcorn Buckets, where we review a movie every Sunday. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can see the video version of this interview, as well as other interviews we've done this year at Random Incorporated, and we're on social media. Our Instagram is Rando Boys, and our Twitter is Random Incorporated 1. And that pretty much is it. Thom, any last words?
Thanks for hosting me, guys. This was really fun. And thank you for being my, like, breaking my teeth on a podcast.
No problem.
So,
all right. Yeah. Well, until next time, guys.